For more than 6 decades, Willie Nelson carried the secrets of Waylon Jennings and Johnny Cash, the confessions they shared in private, the regrets they never wanted the world to hear. They took those secrets to their graves. Willie is the last one left, and now he's ready to tell the truth. To the world they were legends, the outlaws who defied Nashville, who rewrote the rules of country music, who stood shoulder to shoulder as the Highwaymen. Fans saw the laughter, the friendship, the wild rebellion. But behind closed doors, it was different. There were late-night conversations no microphone ever caught. There were regrets whispered in the dark, fears that fame couldn't erase, and a pact among brothers to keep those words buried. Waylon is gone. Johnny is gone. Kris Kristofferson too has faded from the spotlight. Willie remains, carrying the weight of stories never told. At 91, he knows time is no longer his ally, and so, piece by piece, he has begun to reveal what really happened, the pain his friends carried, the truths they couldn't admit, the final words that still echo in his memory. But what exactly did Waylon Jennings confess in those final days? What regrets did Johnny Cash share before his death? And why has Willie decided that only now, after half a century of silence, the world deserves to know? In the 1970s, country music was caught between two worlds. On one side stood Nashville, the polished machine churning out glossy hits designed for radio. On the other stood restless songwriters and performers who wanted more. They wanted freedom, they wanted control over their own sound, and no one wanted it more fiercely than Willie Nelson, Waylon Jennings, and Johnny Cash. Willie had already paid his dues. He'd spent years writing songs for other singers, watching hits like Crazy make stars out of Patsy Cline, while his own career stalled. Nashville producers thought they knew better. They dressed him up in suits, cut his hair short, and insisted he sing in a way that never felt true to him. By the early 70s, he'd had enough. He left Tennessee for Texas, grew his hair long, and started making music on his own terms. Waylon's battle was even sharper. He had the talent, the voice, and the charisma, but in the studio he felt shackled. Producers layered strings and background vocals over his songs until they sounded nothing like the raw energy he brought on stage. Waylon fought back, demanding creative control. He wanted to record with his band, his way. At the time, that kind of defiance could end a career. But Waylon didn't back down. Johnny Cash was already a legend, but he carried his own rebellion. He sang for prisoners when no one else would. He wrote about the poor, the broken, the forgotten. Nashville executives tolerated him because he sold records, but Johnny was always a problem in their eyes, a man who refused to play the part they wanted. Out of these battles, the outlaw movement was born. It wasn't a marketing gimmick or a clever slogan. It was survival. It was 3 men, and later, Kris Kristofferson too, demanding the right to tell the truth in their songs. When the album Wanted, The Outlaws was released in 1976, it was a turning point. It became the first country record to go platinum, proof that fans were starving for something real. The world saw rebellion. What it didn't see was the toll. Nights on the road blurred together, tempers flared, addictions gnawed at them. Fame didn't erase their demons. It often made them worse. That's when the brotherhood deepened. They needed one another, not just as collaborators, but as friends who could carry the weight of what the rest of the world wasn't allowed to see. In those long nights, a code emerged. It was never written down, never even spoken out loud, but every man in that circle understood it. Whatever was shared in confidence stayed there. If one of them faltered, the others closed ranks. If one confessed a regret, it was carried in silence. The outlaw image may have been public, but the outlaw pact was private, and for decades it held strong. Willie remembers those nights with Waylon most clearly. Their bond went beyond the stage. Waylon was a storm, brash, fiery, quick to laugh but quicker to rage when he felt cornered. He carried guilt over the choices he made, guilt that fame couldn't quiet. Drugs and restless living only made the guilt heavier. In private, Waylon let the mask slip. He told Willie about the cost of chasing freedom, the relationships that cracked, the nights he couldn't remember, the moments he wished he could take back. But in those conversations, there was no judgment. Willie wasn't there to lecture, he was there to listen. That was the foundation of their friendship, one man raging against his demons, the other absorbing the storm, and carrying pieces of it so Waylon didn't have to. Willie has said many times that Waylon was more like a brother than a friend, and in those final years, that bond was tested in ways fans never saw. As Waylon's health declined in the late 1990s, the conversations grew heavier. Diabetes and heart problems were eating away at him, and the swagger that once defined him began to fade. In those late-night talks, Willie heard the truth that Waylon never told the cameras. He admitted his regrets, how fame had sometimes blinded him, how the outlaw stance that gave him freedom had also isolated him. He worried about how he would be remembered, whether fans would understand the man behind the myth. For Willie, those confessions were sacred. He held them close, repeating them to no one. When Waylon died in 2002, it was those final words that haunted him most. Not the laughter they shared on stage, not the music that made history, but the quiet regrets that never left the walls of the room. Johnny Cash was different. His darkness was quieter, but no less heavy. By the late 90s, his health was failing too. Years of addiction and struggle had left scars that medicine couldn't fix. But Johnny's pain wasn't only physical. He carried a lifelong weight of guilt. For all his achievements, the hit records, the television show, the awards, he never shook the sense that he had let too many people down. His faith was real, but so were his doubts. He questioned whether his music had truly made a difference, whether the sins he sang about had been forgiven, whether he had done enough to honor the people who believed in him. Willie saw that struggle up close. In private, Johnny admitted things he never would have on stage. He spoke of the burden of being the man in black, of having to live up to a symbol larger than himself. He confessed to fears about death, about what came after, about whether he would see June again when his time finally came. These weren't the words of a legend. They were the words of a man afraid of being forgotten, a man staring down the end and wondering if it all had meaning. Willie listened, as he always did. He carried those confessions, never repeating them, never diminishing them by turning them into stories. And when Johnny died in 2003, just months after June, Willie was left with the echoes of those final conversations. What unites both stories, the fire of Waylon and the quiet weight of Johnny, is the pact. They trusted Willie with the sides of themselves the world never saw. And Willie, true to his word, never spoke of them. Not until now. The secrets aren't sensational headlines. They're not scandals meant to sell papers. They are human truths, the weight of regret, the fear of being forgotten, the knowledge that even legends crumble when the lights go out. And at 91, Willie Nelson has begun to share them, not to betray his brothers, but to make sure the world remembers them as they truly were. The outlaw movement gave country music freedom, but behind that freedom was a cost, and the men who carried it are gone, except for one, Willie Nelson, the last outlaw, finally speaking the words his brothers left behind. The story of Willie Nelson, Waylon Jennings and Johnny Cash can't be told without the Highwaymen. In the mid-1980s, the music industry didn't know what to make of it. Four men, each already legends in his own right, chose to band together. Willie, Waylon, Johnny, and Chris Christopherson stood side by side, not competing but combining their voices into something larger than any one of them. At first, it was easy to dismiss the idea as a marketing stunt. Nashville had long tried to package stars into groups, hoping to capitalize on name recognition. But the Highwaymen weren't like that. They weren't young upstarts being molded by producers. They were veterans, scarred by years of battles with labels, addictions, and personal demons. When they sang together, the weariness in their voices was part of the music. Fans didn't just hear four voices, they heard four lives, each carrying a history of survival. On stage, the dynamic was striking. Willie's high, nasal phrasing cut through like a poet narrating a story. Waylon's booming baritone added grit, the sound of rebellion. Johnny's deep rumble gave it authority, a weight that made every lyric sound final. Chris floated somewhere in between, the songwriter who understood the fragility of it all. Together, they weren't just singing songs, they were living them in real time. What audiences couldn't see was the pact at work, stronger than ever. Each man knew the other's weaknesses, and each stepped in to cover when needed. If Johnny's voice cracked from illness, Waylon would lean in harder to carry the verse. If Waylon was too worn down from diabetes to perform with his old fire, Willie or Chris filled the gaps with humor or gentleness. There was no shame in weakness inside that circle. The Outlaw pact, first forged in smoky bars and back rooms, now stretched across arenas filled with tens of thousands of fans. Between shows, their bond grew deeper. On long bus rides, Johnny sometimes shared pieces of his inner turmoil, the weight of being the man in black, the doubts that haunted him even when the crowd roared. Waylon, more fiery, often cursed himself for choices he couldn't undo, sometimes laughing to hide how deeply the regrets ran. Chris, philosophical, listened more than he spoke, and Willie, as always, absorbed it all. He was the quiet keeper of their truths, the one man they knew would never repeat a word. By the late 1990s, though, time was catching up. The Highwaymen had stopped topping charts, but their friendship remained. What mattered wasn't record sales anymore. It was brotherhood, plain and simple. And it was in that brotherhood that the darkest secrets began to surface. Waylon's health was the first to collapse. Diabetes ravaged his body, leading to surgeries and eventually the loss of a leg. The swagger that once defined him started to fade, but his pride never did. In public, he tried to project strength, refusing pity. But in private, with Willie by his side, the mask cracked. He spoke openly about his fears. He admitted that the outlaw image sometimes felt like a prison, that being the symbol of rebellion meant he could never show weakness. Fans expected him to be the unbreakable rebel, even as his body failed him. He confessed to Willie the pain of relationships damaged by years of addiction and anger. He regretted the time lost with his family, the bridges burned with people he once loved. He wondered aloud whether his music would survive, or whether it would be overshadowed by stories of drugs and defiance. For a man who had built his life on strength, admitting those regrets was almost unbearable, and yet he trusted Willie with them, knowing they would be safe. When Waylon passed in 2002, Willie carried more than memories of friendship. He carried those final words, the weight of a man who had spent his life larger than life, only to reveal in the end how fragile he truly felt. Willie has said that he never forgot those confessions, that they still echo when he thinks of Waylon's last days. Johnny Cash's final years brought a different kind of revelation. By the turn of the millennium, his health was crumbling, but his creativity surged. With producer Rick Rubin, he recorded stark, haunting songs that stripped away the showman and revealed the man. His voice was weaker, but the honesty in it was undeniable. Fans who had grown up with the defiant man in black now heard an aging prophet staring into the void. But even in those bare recordings, Johnny held back pieces of himself. He saved them for private talks with Willie. After June Carter's death in 2003, Johnny was devastated. To the public, he was stoic, pouring his grief into music. To Willie, he admitted the unbearable loneliness, the nights where he wondered if life without June had any meaning. He spoke of faith, but also of doubt, whether he had lived well enough, whether his sins had been forgiven, whether he would truly see June again. These weren't the words of a cultural icon. They were the words of a man facing the end, stripped of certainty, desperate for reassurance. Willie never interrupted, never tried to solve the questions. He simply listened. That was his role in the brotherhood. The witness, the confidant, the man who absorbed the pain so the others didn't have to carry it alone. Johnny's death, just months after June's, was a breaking point. Willie was left with silence. Waylon was gone, Johnny was gone, Chris was fading from the spotlight, and suddenly Willie realized that he was the last one carrying the pact. For years he said little. He honored their privacy, keeping the pact intact even after death. But age has a way of changing perspective. At 91, Willie knows the world is different. The outlaw era has become history, remembered in documentaries and nostalgic concerts. Younger fans know the songs but not the men, and the weight of silence carried alone has grown heavier than ever. That's why he has begun to speak. Not in scandal, not in betrayal, but in honesty. He has shared glimpses of Waylon's regrets, of Johnny's fears, of the doubts and burdens they carried in secret. He has said that the world should remember them, not only as legends, but as men who stumbled, who questioned themselves, who longed for forgiveness as much as they longed for applause. For Willie, telling these truths is an act of love. He knows the danger of myth, that it can make people forget the humanity behind the image. By revealing the secrets Waylon and Johnny carried, he ensures their humanity is remembered alongside their greatness. They weren't flawless heroes. They were flawed men who still managed to create something timeless. At 91, Willie is at peace with his legacy. His music will outlast him. His place in history is certain. What matters now is leaving behind the full truth, not just the outlaw image, but the reality behind it. That reality is heavier, sadder, more complicated, and in that complexity lies the real story. Fans often ask why Willie has chosen to speak now, after half a century of silence. The answer is simple: time. When you're the last one left, silence is no longer loyalty, it is erasure. If he doesn't tell the stories, no one will. And to Willie, that would be the true betrayal. The outlaw movement gave country music its freedom, but its greatest gift may be something quieter, the reminder that even giants struggle in the dark. By breaking his silence, Willie Nelson has given fans one last gift: the truth that Waylon and Johnny carried to their graves. Their secrets were never about scandal, they were about being human. And by sharing them now, Willie has ensured that the Outlaws are remembered not just for the songs that shook Nashville, but for the men who sang them, lived them, and carried their weight until the very end. For more emotional stories, check out this video.